Give me a paper and a pen so I can write about my life of sin. A couple bottles of gin in case I don't get in. Tell all my people I'm a rider. Nobody cries when we die. We outlaws. Let me ride until I get free.
And with that, we welcome you to Early Stoppage, a show where the news of the day is usually given just enough time, but sometimes not enough. I'm John Franklin. I'll be joined shortly, as always, by Craig Allen of Fight Night Picks. So we have actually already been joined by Craig Allen. All right, Craig, on this episode of Early Stoppage, we pick up where we left off last week by profiling the UFC landscape and looking at the top of each division. We have a few all-time greats that hold belts and some champs looking to solidify or begin their legacies while others are hot on the trail. Once again, let's get it going in the lower weight divisions. This episode, we're calling this the G.O.A.T Edition, right? And we'll explain why it was important to do a special edition later in the show. But G.O.A.T Edition, so we're going to go through each of the divisions, talk about who the GOAT is, who the People's Champ is, who the uncrowned champ is, who the honorable mention is. I took a look at some of the work that Craig had did earlier, and it looks like it was written by a 25-year-old. So we'll definitely talk about the history of MMA. I got the UFC encyclopedia right here. I got the MMA encyclopedia right here. I got my starting lineup, Muhammad Ali right here. And we are as ready as anyone could be to do a GOAT edition. So not only that, but we're going to rank them. Here's how I want to do it, Craig. We'll do it a little bit differently than other people have done things like this. And you know what? All due respect to the other fighters in these divisions and the work they did, but this is the GOAT edition. So when we rank them, I only want to go top 5. And I only want to have people who had a shot at being the GOAT, meaning they had to have fought for a title. There will be some non-champions, of course, that crack the list. But again, no one will be included who did not at least fight for the belt. All right, Craig, let me get your initial thoughts, and then we'll hit the divisions.
I mean, I'm so excited to talk about guys like Derek Lewis getting a shot at the belt at heavyweight, Elvis Sinicic at 205. I mean, no, this is a really good way to look at the GOAT conversation. And yeah, some of the names that I threw in there are pretty recent. And then there's some names there that we're going to go through it. Maybe if you missed them when you were doing all of this and editing, I threw in some that haven't fought for the belt before, but there's an exception. There's a couple of exceptions, but we'll get to it.
All right, but hey, let's talk about it this way as well, guys. What's everybody doing right now? We're kind of sitting home. Some of you guys that are in the MMA media or are fans have extra time on your hands. You're going through Fight Pass. You're trying to find some new content. That wasn't really the phoenix or the genesis of how this happened. But if you guys, here's a name that you haven't heard before, go check them out on Fight Pass. Go check them out on YouTube. Find some of their older fights and see what all the fuss was about. All right, Craig. Let's start with 125 pounds. Obviously, any conversation about this division basically begins and ends with Demetrius Johnson, 11 title defenses, the most in the history of the UFC, a streak ended by Henry Cejudo in a very controversial fight. Let's talk the history of the flyweight division. You can begin talking about the GOAT, People's Champ, all that.
This is a division that just about 2 years ago, right after Demetrius Johnson lost to Henry Cejudo, a lot of people thought they were shuffling it out. There were plenty of fighters that they had just brought in that had exciting fights that the UFC decided to cut after 1 or 2 losses or even a win. So it's one of those ones that was a little bit of maybe an afterthought. It's a division where a lot of people think to themselves, if they're just casual fans, if there was a fight in a bar and I weigh 190 pounds and a guy that's 125 pounds comes up to me, I can probably beat the hell out of him. Well, no, you can't. Not even the worst flyweight in the UFC. I mean, they could beat you, hands down. But it's such a division that's been overshadowed. The fact that Demetrius Johnson, when Anderson Silva was racking up title win after title win, they kept giving him belts. Most champions they did. Demetrius Johnson had to ask to get those extra title belts. They were just, content on giving him 1 or maybe 2 or 3. But he had 11, which is insane. So to me, the division's pretty well defined by Demetrius Johnson, but there's a lot of different players there for sure.
All right, so if Demetrius Johnson's the GOAT, who do you got as the People's Champ?
For me, it's a guy that unfortunately just lost very recently. Joseph Benavidez. He's been there. He's done that. He's had his chances. He's lost every single time. He's the People's Champ to me.
So if we're saying that the GOAT is the guy that kind of ruled the division and the People's Champ is the guy who was a champion and maybe wasn't the GOAT necessarily, maybe the champion that was the favorite of the people. I agree with where you're coming from, although we do have another category where Benavidez might be a little bit better of a fit. I think that you can give the GOAT to Demetrius Johnson, and I think you can give the People's Champ to Demetrius Johnson. I will say this. I do think people like Henry Cejudo a lot more than they let on. I don't think they're as bothered by the cringe stuff. I think that he's a former Olympic champion. I think that if he dropped the cringe stuff tomorrow, he'd be hugely popular. So I see your Benavidez. I'll go with Johnson getting GOAT and People's Champ. What about uncrowned champ?
For uncrowned champ, Benavidez has to be in that conversation. You're right. And then this is where I get a little squirrely. So uncrowned champ, there's plenty of different people that challenge for the belt. Guys like Wilson Hayes, names that just, fly off the page that people definitely remember. And then there's the assassin baby, Brandon Moreno. I think this guy's the uncrowned champ of the future. I think in 2020, he's going to fight for the belt. He's going to win it. That's why I went with uncrowned champ, but I'd like to hear your thoughts on this one.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I went with Benavidez. You can make a case for Moreno if that's the way you interpret the conversation. Obviously, that makes sense to me. For honorable mention, you put down Henry Cejudo. I agree with that. But let's get into ranking these, and then we'll talk about some of the honorable mentions and the other guys. I'm going to just go down with guys who have fought for the belt after we cover 1, 2, and 3. So, I mean, for me, it's got to be Demetrius Johnson 1, Henry Cejudo 2, Benavidez 3. Does that make sense to you?
Yep.
So then 4, 5, we got guys like Dodson, Moraga, Ali Bogatinov, who everybody thought was going to be a champion for years, and then he kind of had some USADA issues. Chris Carrasco, Kyoji Horiguchi, Dodson, Tim Elliott, Wilson Hayes, and Ray Borg. Also, interesting honorable mention, TJ Dillashaw technically fought for this belt. So who do you got 4 and 5?
So Johnson, Cejudo, Benavidez, 4's got to be Horiguchi. And I know, majority of this is going to be UFC list, but I think Horiguchi's accomplishments outside of the UFC, including the UFC, were insane. I mean, Ryzen champ, Bellator champ, UFC champ. I mean, Chris Cyborg's what are they calling her now? The Grand Slam of Champions, but Horiguchi's pretty close on those heels. And then 5's difficult for me. I don't know. I go with Magic Man, John Dodson, but I don't know.
Yeah, I think we go that's what I was going to say. I was going to say John Dodson because he fought for the belt twice. Okay, so before we go on, we didn't talk about Davison Figueiredo at 125 pounds. Do you think that he deserves inclusion in the top 5 because he technically lost belt, but he fought in a title fight, defeated Benavidez, is sort of an uncrowned champion. Does he belong with any consideration for uncrowned champion for top 5, considering we have guys in the top 5 who are not champions? What do you think?
You could, yeah. I didn't think about that.
So if we're going to do it again, let's do it again real quick. Just 1 Johnson, 2 Cejudo.
Yeah.
3 Benavidez.
Yeah.
4 Horiguchi.
Yes.
5 Dodson.
Yes.
Does Davison Figueiredo belong over any of those guys?
No.
Let's move on to the bantamweight division. It's generally regarded as Dominic Cruz's division. However, despite having the most wins in title fights, he does not have the most title defenses. That distinction belongs to Renan Barão, and he looked horrible, Cruz that is, against Cody Garbrandt. Let's talk 135 pounds. Who'd you settle on for the GOAT?
For the GOAT, I went with Dominic Cruz. I mean, there's not a guy out there today that people are saying, hey, insert him into the top 5, give him a fight, and if he wins, he's going to fight for the title. And Dominic Cruz has this aura around him that I don't understand. I mean, again, you're going to realize the shine that I have for MMA. And I had to explain it on Fight Night Picks this week because a lot of people just think these guys are shot out of a cannon and they've been into MMA forever. I get into it. Matt actually explained this. The UFC 1 video game had a demo of Shogun and I think it was Lyoto Machida. So Matt and I watched that fight so many times, and that's how we got into MMA. It was just watching that, watching all those free videos that they had on there. I remember like late at night, it was midnight. I was a badass for staying up that late. And I put that video game in because they had these videos. And I'd watch the finale of The Ultimate Fighter 1, Forrest Griffin, Stephan Bonner. And I thought that was the coolest thing ever. I get into it. Then I stopped in about 2012 or so when I went to university. Then in 2015, 2016, I got back in MMA. Dominic Cruz between 2012 and 2015 was still like top of the pop, more or less. I mean, you had Renan Barão as your champ from 2012 to 2014, but Dominic Cruz still inserted himself in there. But just the way that this guy fought, the herky-jerky motion, like he was so much fun to watch, and he won the belt multiple times. That's why I had Dominic Cruz up there.
Yeah, Cruz to me is a little bit like Grant Hill. He's somebody that we thought was going to be great, and we kind of forgive the injuries, still kind of, give him that greatness. There are other guys, obviously, Gale Sayers, other players in the history of sports who have also fallen into that. But Dominic Cruz, we feel like, okay, if he were healthy in that time period, it's kind of like those couple years Jordan missed when he retired. Like, oh, they would have won those years. Probably not, but, whatever. So, a lot of what we, sort of attribute to Dominic Cruz is based on what he accomplished and forgiving him his injuries. Moving on to People's Champ. Who'd you have for the People's Champ?
Okay, for People's Champ, I had, and again, the same way I did it at flyweight, I have Uriah Faber there. Uriah Faber, he was a champ in WEC, but he wasn't a champ in the UFC. And he challenged, and he was always fighting the best guys. But a lot of people consider him the People's Champ. And I know he's in the UFC Hall of Fame, so that's why I had him there as well.
I went with Cody Garbrandt. I think the way he looked against Dominic Cruz that night, and people that were on the fence about Cruz or kind of thought that Cruz was a little too full of himself, loved Cody Garbrandt, loved that performance. That was Dominic Cruz's comeuppance in many people's eyes. So I went with Garbrandt. I think that had Garbrandt been a little bit, you hate to say better of a fighter, but had his career gone a little bit differently, I think he would have been an immensely popular fighter and would have, really he has a career that kind of a big what-if career as well.
Like, as a bit of an aside, so getting back into MMA, what have you, I started to watch the rise of Cody Garbrandt and used to watch, and this is kind of sad the way that it's going to sound, but I used to watch MMA with the same group of 5 or 6 people. And there's a guy and his girlfriend, when I met her, was the biggest Cody Garbrandt fan I've known in my entire life. And boy, did her life and his life both go down a rocky road.
All right, let's move on to Uncrowned Champ. Who'd you have for Uncrowned Champ?
I threw down TJ Dillashaw just due to the fact that he's not the champ right now, but multiple-time champion, just kind of not like Dominic Cruz, but like Dominic Cruz, because with TJ Dillashaw, such an interesting career path. Like, started off as a wrestler, wrestled in college, met Mark Munoz, got into MMA, won a belt, got into, Muay Thai, kickboxing, and now he's like the face of Bang Muay Thai. So TJ Dillashaw, for me, just ups and downs, winning belts, losing belts. That's why I'm this uncrowned champ.
I'm going to go with Uriah Faber because, I like the Dillashaw thing because I think that now that he's had all his issues, I think people are struggling with his even being a title holder at all. And I think that's, what I'm saying, even though he's had some good nights, he looked great in certain fights, I think they're really struggling with that. And, the win over Cody Garbrandt is almost all but forgotten based on where his career has gone the last couple of years.
It's crazy because he beat him twice.
Right. So I think that for me, Uriah Faber, just because he was so close, he had it seemed like, and we'll get into this in other divisions, if a certain guy's got your number, well, the guy that had Uriah Faber's number was always Dominic Cruz, and he just could never get over the hump and get to the next level. For honorable mention, who'd you have?
Really, you could say honorable mention. You could say greatest of all time at 135 pounds. And a new MMA fan would not believe you because this guy now, he just signed with a Serbian promotion, but it's Renan Barão. Renan Barão was undefeated forever, was a champ for quite a while, and then he just fell right off the face of the earth and lost.
Yeah, I can agree with that. I think that he's fallen off, but he looked so impressive against Uriah Faber. And when you look at what he actually did, it was just basically beat Uriah Faber. But at the same time, so I don't know. I get it. He looked impressive. Yeah. And then there's that issue as well. All right. So let's go ahead and rank them. Again, we can just go through this right away. Obviously Cruz is on top. Who do you have at number 2?
People aren't going to like this, but TJ Dillashaw.
I want to go with Cody Garbrandt, and I want to go with Uriah Faber in the same way that, if someone is that one step behind the greatest of all time, I'm going to go with Uriah Faber, even though he never wore the belt. So I can respect your TJ Dillashaw. You also alluded to what may have aided Dillashaw in his victories. So I'll go with Uriah Faber at number 2. The problem is if I don't put TJ Dillashaw at number 2, where can I put him in the top 5 that excuse it? That's like saying it's okay for someone to be number 3 if they did PEDs and not number 2.
They were legal back then. So
that's true.
Let's just go 1 Cruz, 2 Faber, 3 Garbrandt. Settle on it.
Okay, what else?
Where's Renan Barão fit?
4 at best.
And then 5 would have to be.
Do you put Cejudo in there?
Yeah, why not?
So we got 1 Cruz, 2 Faber, 3 Garbrandt, 4 Barão, 5 Cejudo.
Is in a good place. Very deep, lots of prospects. Featherweight division in general, still regarded as one of the better divisions due to the fact that you had Jose Aldo at the top for so long. See, I'm stuck with flyweight and bantamweight. That Henry Cejudo is still in my mind. Triple C, maybe we see him at featherweight. But right now, I still consider Jose Aldo as the greatest of all time at 145 pounds. He has designs on winning the belt at 135 right now. So that kind of complicates things. But for sure, I have Jose Aldo topping my list.
Yeah, I think that Keith and I had an argument once upon a time where I might have touted Max Holloway. When you look at the numbers, it's hard to tout Max Holloway. The problem is he looks so good against Jose Aldo that it kind of throws you for a loop. I think it makes sense that Jose Aldo would be the GOAT. Let's talk about the People's Champ.
Yeah, People's Champ is a guy that won the belt one time, and that was that. It's Conor McGregor. I mean, yeah, okay, timeout. He had the interim belt against Chad Mendes, then he fought Jose Aldo, but still, he's the People's Champ. Everybody regards him as a featherweight champ, a lightweight champ, maybe even future welterweight champ. But for me, McGregor's People's Champ here.
I think for here is where I'll put Max Holloway. I think he's People's Champ. I think a lot of people
fair.
like him. I think he's a good champion. I think he represents the sport well, represents the division well. I'll put Holloway here at People's Champ. Uncrowned Champ.
This is a guy that fought for the belt on different occasions, never was able to win it at 145. He's a former champ at 155. Frankie Edgar, to me, is your uncrowned champ.
I'm going to go with Chad Mendes here. He fought for the belt twice, losing both, a lot closer fight in one than the other. He was just kind of, he fought. Actually, if you want to get real funky about it, he fought for the belt 3 times. He fought Jose Aldo twice and Conor McGregor once. So he was of anybody in this division, he was the closest to the belt. In terms of honorable mention, guys that fought for the belt, we got Hominick, we got Florian, Edgar you talked about, we got the Korean Zombie, Ricardo Lamas. Is there anybody in that group that you think deserves honorable mention?
You could put Anthony Pettis there too. You really could. But I'm going to go with the guy that beat Anthony Pettis that you had as your People's Champ, Max Holloway. And one thing that Matt Allen, formerly of the Loudmouth MMA Podcast Network, had to say was we did this thing this week called Top 5 MMA Cards You Should Watch. And Matt's first card that we started the show off with was UFC 206. And if you're listening now, after the show, go ahead and check it out. But Matt really pumped the tires of that fight between Max Holloway and Anthony Pettis. It was a great card, but for honorable mention, Max Holloway. I mean, what is it? The 10th island of Canada, but also Las Vegas and everywhere. He's a fan favorite, and for me, he deserves to be an honorable mention.
I'm going to flip with you. I'm going to put Conor in my honorable mention because I have People's Champ. I think that he's obviously was the biggest fighter ever at 145 pounds, but he, won 2 fights at 145 of relevance in terms of the interim and the full title.
What about the Dennis Seaver fight?
Yeah, what about it? Let's move on to the top 5. Obviously, Jose Aldo we have at the top spot. Who do you have number 2?
You could put Max Holloway number 2. I wouldn't argue.
I like Max Holloway at 2. What about 3?
I'd say McGregor.
4?
That's where it gets tricky. I don't know.
Mendes?
Yeah, Mendes.
And then what about 5?
Frankie Edgar.
There we go. Yeah, you can make a case for Frankie Edgar. Or some of these other maybe long-standing guys that, the Zombie, maybe someday Yair Rodriguez, somebody like that. There's a lot of guys at 45 now that might be able to make a run. How about this guy we didn't mention, current champion, Volkanovski. Does he deserve to be in the top 5 over someone that never won the belt?
Yeah, you know what? That's fair. I'd put him in there above. See, to me, I don't hold as much weight with Chad Mendes as I do with Frankie Edgar, but you could certainly make the case that Volkanovski deserves to be there due to the fact that he beat our potential People's Champ and honorable mention of Max Holloway. So, yeah, I'd put him 4 or 5 and maybe boot one of those 2 out.
Okay, so let's redo it because I think you can make a case. So Jose Aldo's number 1. Number 2 is Max Holloway. Do we put Volkanovski at 3 or is that too high?
McGregor 3.
Okay, McGregor 3. Volkanovski 4.
I'm fine with Mendes. I'm not going to get mad.
Mendes at 5. All right, sounds good. All right, let's move on to 155 pounds. Craig, these days Khabib Nurmagomedov seems like an unbeatable fighter at 155 pounds, and BJ Penn seems like a punchline. But it is Penn, not Nurmagomedov, who is tied for most title defenses with Frankie Edgar and Benson Henderson, all fighters having 3. Tell me your thoughts about the lightweight division historically.
Historically, great. I mean, it was a division that, again, like Dana White thought he was going to do with the flyweight division in 2018, 2019. He did to the UFC's lightweight division at one point. I mean, we're not talking about Jens Pulver here. We should be, but we're not. So, historically great division. When you're talking about those champs, BJ Penn, Frankie Edgar, Benson Henderson, and the list goes on, maybe the belt changed hands a couple of times. You can even reference Anthony Pettis in there as well. But man, those were great times to be a fan of 155. And it's still a great time to be a fan of 155 because you have, the McGregors, you have Nurmagomedov, Tony Ferguson, Dan Hooker, Paul Felder. Like the list just goes on and on in terms of current, but historically one of the better divisions.
Who's your GOAT?
This one's where it gets tricky. I'm pretty sure I wrote down BJ Penn and you didn't erase it. I think I wrote down BJ Penn.
I will take umbrage with it, though, but go ahead.
Yeah, I've got BJ Penn there. I mean, in terms of defining the lightweight division, BJ Penn for sure. The early stages, the middle stages, not so much the late stages, but BJ Penn at 155. At one point, there was a lot of relevance. And between 2008 and 2010, when the sport was really growing, when I became a fan, that's when BJ Penn was reigning at 155.
Here's where it gets funky for me because I think one bad night erased an entire career's worth of dominance. I think the GOAT at 155 pounds is Benson Henderson. And the reason why I say that is because I'm looking at resumes. So when I look at BJ Penn, now the knock on BJ has always been he's neither fish nor fowl, right? He's too big to be a lightweight. He's too small to be a welterweight. So he's kind of somewhere in the middle. Now, whether he's too small for – I really don't think he's too big necessarily to be a lightweight. At the time, he was too talented to be a lightweight. That's where I think that the discrepancy became. But anyway, he beat Sean Sherk, beat Kenny Florian, beat Diego Sanchez. None of those guys is even going to back their way into the Hall of Fame. Okay, when I look at Benson Henderson.
Whoa. Diego Sanchez is in the Hall of Fame.
Okay. He's in the Hall of Fame for a fight. He's not in the Hall of Fame for a career. He's in there, though. You're right. He's as much a Hall of Famer as Stephen Bonner is. All right, but when I look at Benson Henderson's career, he beat Frankie Edgar, he beat Nate Diaz, and he beat Gilbert Melendez. All three of those guys are high-level guys. All three of those guys are championship-level fighters in this respect. Nate Diaz never wore a belt, but he beat a person who had a belt, which was Conor McGregor. So did he beat him for his belt? No. Had they fought at 150 – actually, I don't think Conor had the 55 belt yet, but he beat a champion in Conor McGregor. So for me, that's more impressive. But I think that he looks so bad against Anthony Pettis and that he was such a decision machine that I think people just forget about how great of a champion he was. Now, he only had 3 title defenses, so he's not – I'm not saying that Anderson Silva's walking through that door. But for me, the GOAT's Benson Henderson. All right, so let's move on to People's Champ.
People's Champ, it's again Conor McGregor. I mean, Conor McGregor, when that fight against Eddie Alvarez, again, watched it with a bunch of buddies, and one of the buddies was the biggest Eddie Alvarez fan. I don't know where I find these people. The biggest Cody Garbrandt fan, the biggest Eddie Alvarez fan. This guy was going nuts, and every time Eddie Alvarez hit the canvas, this guy was like, no, it's fine. Eddie gets hit all the time, and Eddie's wife screaming, Conor McGregor wins the belt, double champ. He's my People's Champ just for that fact that he held on to that belt for a while. For
People's Champ, I'm going to go with Frankie Edgar. Frankie beat BJ when BJ was BJ. Beat Gray Manor twice. One was a draw, actually. And we'll get to uncrowned champs here in a second. But I just think that Frankie being a fighter who really belonged probably in the bantamweight division, as we're seeing now as he's going down, to win at 155 pounds. I mean, listen, 155 pounds isn't stacked with 5'11", 6 foot, 6'2" guys. So, I mean, he wasn't that outmatched, as people like to say. But he was sort of out of his division. He's probably a more natural lightweight. The fact that Frankie Edgar, there's a whole list of guys that he never fought that I would have loved to have seen him fight. Dominic Cruz being one. So I'll give him People's Champ. What about uncrowned champ?
So this is where, again, I went a little squirrely. But for me, it's Takanori Gomi, the Fireball Kid. I mean, yeah, his run in the UFC, like near the end, was bad. He lost 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 fights in a row before they cut him. But in terms of his early career and when it was Pride Bushido or Shuto or wherever it was, the guy was on fire. His jiu-jitsu was second to none. I mean, he lost to BJ Penn on, what was it, Rumble in the Rock? Was it 3? I think it was 3. Might have been 4. I think it was 3. And then he won another huge win streak. He beat Jens Pulver, the former UFC champ. I mean, his wins are second to none. You can go through some of the names. Dwayne Ludwig, Mac Danzig. Definitely didn't beat Joe Lozon. Definitely didn't beat Nate Diaz or Clay Guida or Kenny Florian. But at one point, Takanori Gomi was he was one of the top pound-for-pound fighters in the world and the top lightweight in the world. And he wasn't even a UFC champ, which is crazy to think of back when.
Yeah, someday we're going to have to sit down and really talk about one of the theories that I have is how do Asian fighters who go from there and fight in the States, how do they perform? How do American fighters that go from here and fight in Japan or other parts of Asia? Because I think a lot of that will tell you about Takanori Gomi's career and what it could have been in the States and what it maybe never was in the States. For me, for uncrowned champ, I don't put as much stock in interim titles as I probably should. I'm going to go with Tony Ferguson, only because he's been as good in this division as anyone. Huge win streak. If all this that's going on in the world right now subsides, we'll really get to figure out what's going down between him and Khabib. But I think that he's been up near the top of the division for a long time, is not wearing the true gold. So I'll go with him for uncrowned champ. In terms of honorable mention, who'd you have?
Your current champ, Khabib Nurmagomedov. I mean, he's on the way. He's on the way to becoming the GOAT, possibly, but you have to right now consider him just honorable mention, but on the way.
So when we rank these fighters, and I'm going to agree with you at honorable mention with Khabib Nurmagomedov, but when we rank these fighters, there's a couple of ways you can do it, and we've talked about this before in terms of pound-for-pound ratings, in terms of historical rankings, all these things that when people do these type of things, what they take into account. Here's the one thing. If there was a tournament and all these guys were in it with Khabib Nurmagomedov, he'd probably be the GOAT. So that's where this gets really interesting in terms of, in a second here, we're about to rank them. So let's get to that. Let's go 1 to 5. I'll let you start, and I'll tell you any disagreements I have with you. Who'd you have at number 1?
I'm going to go 1 to 5 really quick.
Okay.
I'm going Khabib, Conor McGregor, Benson Henderson, Takanori Gomi, and BJ Penn, maybe, I guess. I'd put Tony Ferguson ahead of BJ Penn.
Yeah, I think that I would have to work Edgar in there. This division's so great right now.
That's the thing.
Like, we didn't even say hardly a word about Anthony Pettis. Everybody thought he was a world beater for a while. They put the guy in a Wheaties box. We hardly said a word. We didn't say anything about Rafael dos Anjos, right? We didn't say anything about Eddie Alvarez. A lot of these guys, they have a good night, and then someone else comes through, destroys them. We forget all about what they've done. So for me, I think that I agree with Khabib. Conor's a tough number 2 for me, only because he hasn't spent enough time in the division, and he did lose to Khabib. So if you say he's worse than Khabib, that makes him get number 2. I'm gonna juxtapose a little bit. I'm gonna go Khabib. I'm gonna go Benson. I'm gonna go Conor, Frankie, Tony. That's the best fair. I got. All right, let's move on to 170 pounds. Craig, George St. Pierre is the unquestioned and unchallenged GOAT at 170 pounds. However, this division, much like light heavyweight, which we will get into later, has a long history with a few champions with some nice title defense streaks. GSP's 9 is followed by Matt Hughes' 5, Pat Militich's, and Tyron Woodley's 4. Let's talk welterweight history. Who'd you have as the GOAT? I mean, is there any question?
I do actually have a question. I'm pretty sure of this one. I just want to make sure. Pat Militich, when he was a welterweight, wasn't that still 185 pounds?
No. So the way it worked was when he fought, they called it lightweight, but he fought, it was technically welterweight.
There we go. Okay. Glad I got the question out of the way. And a reminder to the listeners is 108 in Fredericton, New Brunswick, Canada. Now, in terms of this division, my GOAT has to be the guy that got me into MMA, that was so dominant, one of the most dominant champs in UFC MMA history, George St. Pierre. Without a doubt, I don't think anybody really comes close.
I agree. I mean, it's hard to argue with that. What can you say about GSP? I mean, he always kind of found a way to fight the fight. The most amazing thing you could probably say about him is that his best skill towards the middle and end of his career was something that he didn't even begin his career in. He came into mixed martial arts with a karate and striking background, taekwondo, and he ended up being one of the premier wrestlers in the division, out wrestling guys who had wrestled their whole lives. So, yeah, I mean, it's hard to argue with GSP in that spot. But there was a time when Matt Hughes was the guy, right? So we'll give GSP the GOAT here, obviously. Let's move on to People's Champ. What are your thoughts there?
I don't know if I get squirrely with this one, and it counts because he was an interim champ at 170, but I've got Carlos Condit, the natural-born killer. I mean, the performances this guy put on, yeah, maybe the GSP fight didn't go all that well, but still, Carlos Condit to a lot of people, I think would be their people's champ, so I put him there.
This is an interesting one for me. When I look up and down, so here's the thing. I think there's been a little bit of revisionist history with Matt Hughes. Matt Hughes was a hugely popular fighter when he was in his prime. People like GSP better, so you could make an argument for GSP as the people's champ. I mean, and the GOAT, just like we did with Demetrius Johnson. You could make an argument for Matt Hughes in his prime. I'm going to make the argument for Robbie Lawler. I think that Robbie Lawler was the guy that the people really wanted. He was like the second coming of Matt Hughes. So he had a little bit of the Matt Hughes shine. He was this guy that would just go to complete wars. That's my guy. I'm gonna put Robbie Lawler as people's champ.
I like that pick, and if I could get one more, I might as well go with a Canadian that was a champ. Let's go Carlos Newton. Let's throw him on there too.
Let's go with him. He's another guy who was an impressive fighter, and then he gets slammed by Matt Hughes, and everybody forgets his career. All right, let's talk uncrowned champ. Who'd you have there?
Jorge Masvidal? Would you put Masvidal there? I mean, he's the BMF champ, and he fought at 170 pounds. I don't know.
He's not bad. So for uncrowned champ, again, I don't put as much stock into interim championships as you do, so I'll put Carlos Condit here. I do think you can make a case for John Fitch. Had a really long run up near the top.
I've got another one that we didn't put here. What about Big Rig? I mean, Johnny Hendricks had that fight against GSP. He didn't win it, and then when he fought for the title, he did win it. So you could put Johnny Hendricks there.
Well, and not only did he win it, but then he didn't keep it. You know, like he won it from Robbie Lawler, and the next thing you know, he's gone. And Robbie Lawler's the champ after defeating Roy McDonald. Roy McDonald might not be a bad choice for uncrowned champ. Huge fights with, I think that when you talk about uncrowned champs, and we're really going to get into this. We're really going to get into this at 185. When you talk about uncrowned champs, who are the guys that came the closest to the championship belt without winning it? Now, listen, and there's another guy I failed to mention who should probably get his ass dropped back in, I think, 155, Gray Maynard. Gray Maynard had a draw with Frankie Edgar that most people thought that he won. So you can make a case for Gray Maynard being an uncrowned champ. I like your call with Johnny Hendricks. Roy McDonald makes a lot of sense. I like the Wonder Boy pick as an uncrowned champ. For honorable mention, who'd you have here?
Well, I mean, we've got two names, one name twice. We've got Tyron Woodley. So Matt Hughes, Tyron Woodley, Matt Hughes is what we have written down. But Matt Hughes, to me, if he's not my GOAT and if he's not the people's champion, if he's not uncrowned champ, he has to be an honorable mention due to the fact that, second place for most all-time title defenses or title fights. And yeah, I mean, I remember watching, again, this is when I get into MMA. I remember watching his retirement fight and thinking, wow, that was one of the craziest walkouts I think I've ever seen in MMA.
I think that Tyron Woodley is going to fall prey to the same thing that's going to happen to Robert Whitaker here in a second, which is he had two largely uneventful fights with, the other big guy name in the division. And while, I don't know, Whitaker's fights were better than Woodley's and Thompson's fights, or Whitaker and Romero. I mean, were better than Thompson and Woodley, in my opinion. But, Woodley just seems to have a very uneventful career, or had an uneventful career. And I think that Hughes was the GOAT before GSP, and he has a win over GSP, which not many people can say. So I think that gives him, if nothing else, honorable mention.
Yeah, I mean, if we could put one more name on this list for honorable mention, it's an easy one that I just thought of right now. Matt Serra.
Yeah, I mean, listen, Matt Serra came in. He certainly deserves a mention in the, an honorable mention. He did GSP, and he didn't have a very long reign. The one guy, listen, guys, if anybody's listening to this podcast and they want to kind of have somebody to go look at, now listen, the names you're going to hear when you see this guy fight are not huge names, okay? Jorge Patino, Andre Pedneris, who ended up being a great coach, John Alessio, Kenichi Yamamoto. These are the guys that Pat Miletich defeated in addition to Mikey Burnett, who's former Lions Den fighter. But that's a guy that you want to watch because Pat Miletich, along with some guys we're going to talk about in other divisions, spoiler alert, Frank Shamrock, are guys that were present-day fighters, but back then. They had the complete package. They had submissions. They had takedowns. They had striking. Pat Miletich, there's a reason why Miletich Fighting Systems went on the run it did when he started coaching, because he was such a great fighter. So he was so great as a coach. He's so great as an analyst. People forget how great of a fighter he was. I mean, this guy, inaugurated the welterweight division. All right. Oh, let's rank them 1 to 5. Who do you got?
I'm going to go quick. I've got GSP, Matt Hughes, Pat Miletich, Tyron Woodley. That's 4, 5. That's really difficult. Who? Kamaru Usman?
Yeah, and we didn't mention Kamaru Usman throughout this, and he looks, based on his fights prior to, I mean, he looked great against Tyron Woodley, right? So that's number one. But, his fight, he looked good against Colby Covington. That fight was a lot closer than some people would like to believe because of the hatred for Colby Covington.
The
But
Damian Maia fight, the RDA fight,
yeah, he's had some great
great
fights. And if you talk about, in terms of what these guys are, Damian Maia could make an argument in another world for being an uncrowned champion. RDA was a champion, just in a different division. So, yeah, Usman's put together a nice little career, even though he's had the belt for just a short period of time. Greg, it's hard to believe the 185-pound division or even think of it without Anderson Silva at the top. Longest title reign in terms of days, 2, 4, 5, 7 is the number of days, 10 title defenses. Let's talk about the rest of the division because we got the GOAT.
I mean, all right. So we got the GOAT. It's Anderson Silva. I don't disagree with that. Then you go into People's Champ, and we've got 2 names up here now. You could slot in 5 or 6 different names, but for People's Champ, they're guys that fought at UFC 217 against each other in the main event. Michael Bisping and George St. Pierre. I mean, Michael Bisping was a hardcore champion, if you want to call him that, for the longest time. You win some, you lose some, you hang around, you're top 15 fighter, or you gatekeeper, whatever. And then any given Sunday happened to be a Saturday, and he fought Luke Rockhold and caught him with a left hook and beat him. Then he fought Dan Henderson, he beat him. And then he fought George St. Pierre and he lost. But still, GSP, the run that he went on, the time that he took off from 170 to 185, he comes out, he talks about aliens, he's got a weird bloated stomach, everybody thought he looked poor, and then he comes into that fight, and it's one of the craziest fights of all time. If you can put everything together and not just the fight itself, just everything outside of that and put everything together. It was a crazy fight. So for me, GSP and Michael Bisping, side note, I was a huge Bisping fan and a huge GSP fan. So that's why I have them both there too.
Real quick, I want to put it into perspective. We'll get to that when we rank. People's Champ for me, I think, is Rich Franklin. And I think that because he was the guy that the UFC, he was, there's a handful of guys that you can call UFC company men in a good way, in the sense that they don't seem like they're doing some of the Dana White is a company man, and you feel like he doesn't always have people's best interests in hand. Rich Franklin was a guy who had the great story, and we thought he was going to be champion forever. He fought in other divisions. He was a guy that you could really, now you can make the same case about a guy in Chris Weidman. Chris Weidman, you can make a case for being people's champion. We talked about GSP. You can make a case for Robert Whitaker as a people's champion. There's a lot of guys, depending on the people, who could be people's champion. A lot of people, in terms of being one quote-unquote good guys in the division. You got, for me, it's Franklin, Weidman, Whitaker. Any one of those you choose, I'd be fine with.
Yeah, I'm surprised that you said that Rich Franklin being a company man, because he truly is a company man with 1 championship now.
All right, let's move on to uncrowned champ. What are your thoughts here? There's a couple really good ones here. And not for nothing, the 2 guys that I think we may settle on would have made a hell of a fight.
It's funny because I threw this out there on YouTube this week, made a video about the greatest all-time fighters that never won belts. And for me to say never won belts, it was UFC belts. So for me, these 2 guys definitely count. Dan Henderson is my number 1 for sure, without a doubt. I mean, outside of the UFC, maybe, but in the UFC, never able to really get it. And the closest he came, I would think, was the fight against Bisping. I mean, how old was Dan Henderson in that fight? 76, 77? Yeah. He was old. And I'm not joking. He was an old fighter to be fighting for a title. And that fight was razor thin. It was as close as it gets. And then the other guy who should have won a belt at one point, but blame Paulo Filho for that, is Chael Sonnen. And let me say this first before you say it. It's Chael Sonnen. And I know he's won every single belt. He's made the most amount of money in MMA history, what have you. But Chael Sonnen, for me, he was less than a minute away from absolutely embarrassing and dethroning Anderson Silva. And then it didn't happen. And then he had the second fight, and that one did not go well. And then he had John Jones, and that didn't happen. And Bellator and UFC and so on and so forth. But for me, those guys have to be at the top of uncrowned champs.
So I agree with you. I would go with Chael only because Chael, beat the shit out of Anderson Silva for 4.5 rounds and then got choked out. So, I mean, that's you don't get much closer to a belt than that. I will say this in defense of the Dan Henderson call, and obviously we'll talk about Yoel Romero here in a second as well, more in depth. But let me just give you a quick list of fighters. Okay, we're talking about Vitor Belfort. Okay, we're talking about Vanderlei Silva, Rich Franklin, Michael Bisping, Fedor Emelianenko, Mauricio Shogun Rua. These are a list of champions that Dan Henderson defeated. So when you talk about, are you a champ if you defeat champions? Yes. Are you a champ if you won the belt on the night? No. So, and listen, Dan Henderson was one of the first guys. Listen, he came over from Pride with the Pride belt and fought Anderson in a way to unify those belts and looked good early. And then Anderson, figured him out and got him to the ground and I think choked him out. But, that to me is a testimony to both Dan Henderson, Chael Sonnen, and Yoel Romero, all right there. I think that there's definitely a way that Yoel Romero comes away with the belt against Adesanya. Certainly twice against Whitaker. He could have found the way as well. But here we are. So I think those are all good choices for uncrowned champ. All right, honorable mention, who'd you have?
So this is where it gets a little squirrely, and I'm going kind of UFC and kind of not UFC and kind of Zuffa, kind of not. Gegard Mousasi's my guy because Bellator middleweight champ, Cage Warriors middleweight champ, Dream middleweight champ, Dream light heavyweight champ, Strikeforce light heavyweight champ, like 1-1-1, and in the UFC wins over Mark Munoz, Thiago Santos, Dan Henderson, Lyoto Machida. He's beat some of the biggest names out there. He's fought at heavyweight before. Like Gegard Mousasi, you could consider maybe a people's champ, but for me, I'd put him here.
I'm going to go with Israel Adesanya under the Khabib Nurmagomedov clause, just because he's looked good in his career so far. He's only had listen, if I know that I'm flip-flopping with my interest in the interim belt, but he beat Gastelum for the interim belt. He completely cooked Robert Whitaker to win the belt. And then he defeated Yoel Romero as well. So, you could make a case for honorable mention for Luke Rockhold, although he didn't have much of a reign. Again, if we're giving nothing else to Chris Weidman, I think if you're giving nothing else to Chris Weidman, if you're giving people's champ to someone else, and whatever, then that for me, Chris Weidman has to be honorable mention. Defeated Anderson Silva twice, beat Lyoto Machida, beat Vitor Belfort. As a matter of fact, I'm going to just make it official. Go with Chris Weidman because he's got to be. And we're about to rank these guys.
And Gegard Mousasi beat Chris Weidman. But again, and Luke Rockhold was a Strikeforce middleweight champ too. So yeah. Anyway,
it gets funky. All right, so let's go ahead and rank them. Who do you have for? Obviously Anderson number 1. Who do you have for 2?
Silva, Weidman. This is where it gets weird. Henderson 3, 4. I'm gonna go Rich Franklin, and 5. Again, I still believe Gegard Mousasi because on any given Sunday he could beat the best middleweight in the world. He left the UFC on a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 fight win streak over Talos Ladies, Thiago Santos, Vitor Belfort, Uriah Hall, and Chris Weidman. And that was in a co-main event slot, UFC 210, and Cormier and Johnson 2 was your headliner.
So I'm flip-flopping my criteria for this all over this, but I'm going to go ahead and rank them. Silva 1, Weidman 2, I'll go Rich Franklin 3. Give me Adesanya 4 and Whitaker 5, just because of I'm more impressed with the performances in both the Romero fights, and then Adesanya looked good against Gastelum, and he looked good against Whitaker. So that's how I'm going to rank him. All right, let's move on, Craig. We know who the GOAT is at 205 pounds. He may very well be the GOAT of all time, but this division has had a lot of parity. It's had a lot of champions, and they've all had high profiles. I'll break you down the list of title defenses, and then we can talk about the history division. John Jones, 2 separate title defense streaks. First one was 8. Second one was 3, so a total of 11, but it was split, obviously. Tito Ortiz, 5. Frank Shamrock, 4. Chuck Liddell, 4. Daniel Cormier, 3. So let's talk about the GOAT. It's John Jones. Is there any case – there's Chuck Liddell talk. Obviously, there's Tito.
Randy Couture.
Randy Couture had a belt in there. Yeah. As far as the length of the time he had the belt, though, I don't know. So, or the number of defenses he had. I'll definitely give Randy points for streak to schedule, but because he was always fighting, bangers. He fought Vitor and he fought Chuck and he fought Tito. Whereas in Chuck's reign, he had a little bit, he had a couple of, the guy, Tito was having contract issues or Randy was off in heavy, they were doing other stuff. So we'll stick with John Jones at GOAT. Who do you have for People's Champ?
Yeah, for People's Champ, it's got to be the Iceman. I mean, I have Chuck Liddell here because, in terms of title defenses, it's one less than Tito Ortiz and it's tied with Frank Shamrock. But this was, again, and I have to say People's Champ, this is when I got into MMA. Light heavyweight was one of the deepest divisions. You already had guys from Pride coming over to the UFC, so it was stacked and you still had that excitement. And that's part of the reason why I have Chuck Liddell.
I think you can make a case for Daniel Cormier.
Or Vanderlei
because
Silva.
He's that close to Chuck Liddell. I think you can make a case. Tito Ortiz was a lot more popular than people like to think. He had his segment of the population. Tito Ortiz was the kind of guy. It's fun. It's interesting that he supports Donald Trump because Tito Ortiz was the kind of guy that everybody would claim to dislike, and yet they would win a vote. You know what I'm saying? Like if you did a poll of Tito Ortiz, he's one of those guys that everybody's like, oh, I hate Tito Ortiz. And then you see him walking through the MGM Grand and everybody's running after him. So he was weird in that way. But I think you got to go with the Iceman here just because of what he did for the division, what he did for the sport. He was a crossover star. A lot of it has to do with he had a very unique look. But you can make the case so did Tito. He had blonde hair and he wore flames on his shorts. So, I mean, I'm with you with the call of the Iceman. Uncrowned champ, who do you got?
Yeah, this is one where, again, the guy never actually won the UFC belt. He fought for it, 1, 2, 3 times and lost every single time. But I think a lot of people would have him as their uncrowned champ. And it's just, again, it's due to the strength of schedule. Alexander Gustafsson fought John Jones, lost a decision that was close. And he fought Daniel Cormier, lost a split decision. And then he fought, again, John Jones and got knocked out in the third round in their second fight. So for me, it's Gustafsson. And it's just the fact that he fought 2 of the best of all time and wasn't able to get it. He's kind of got to be my uncrowned champ here.
I agree with that. This is listen, and when we get into the details of this, you want to talk about guys who've been close to championships. If memory serves me, John Jones disgustingly broke his toe against Chael Sonnen, and had he not been able to finish Chael Sonnen would have been the light heavyweight champion. So you want to talk about getting close. Not that he earned it, but he would have had it. So, that would have got interesting. I'll go with Gustafsson as the uncrowned champ. He's probably been the guy that's closest to it. If not for some of John Jones's legal troubles, this may have fallen to Daniel Cormier because Jones would have kept the belt and Cormier would have kept losing to him. But that's not what happened. Cormier actually got the belt. So, I like Gustafsson here. What about honorable mention? And listen, before you get into it, this is the division of honorable mentions. This is the division where, Joe Rogan famously has said, this is the beginning of this era and the beginning of that era. And guys where you think, oh, my God. Typically we'll call heavyweight division, we're about to get into heavyweight division, the baddest man on the planet. I don't know, man. For a lot of years, 205 pounds felt like the baddest man on the planet. Every time somebody won the belt, they won it from some guy you couldn't believe they beat. And so go ahead. I'll let you do your honorable mentions, and then I'll hit mine. I
started the show by kind of talking about Lyoto Machida and Shogun Rua. So both of these guys are honorable mentions. Then you had mentioned Tito Ortiz. I had him here. Quentin Rampage Jackson, former champ. He's got to be here. Daniel Cormier, Forrest Griffin, Vanderlei Silva. I mean, you just keep naming names. You kind of can't go wrong, I don't think.
You can't. I mean, my honorable mention is Frank Shamrock, only because he sort of inaugurated the division. He was one of those guys. I don't know that he fought at 205. I think he was a little bit lighter, but he was over 185. So he was
he seemed ahead of his time when you watch his fights.
He was way ahead of his time, and he was kind of a little bit like Ken. He had a little bit of what Ken had, but he was faster, and he seemed like a little bit more of a cerebral fighter than Ken. He was, if we're going to start talking about who was the first mixed martial artist, and there's a lot of different ways you can go with this, you can make a case for Frank Shamrock. A lot of guys will point to guys like Don Fry because they had boxing and wrestling. Frank Shamrock, man, he had the total package. Frank Shamrock was the guy who was in the corner of Maurice Smith when he beat Mark Coleman. So, he had a lot going for him. For me, you almost have to mention Tito and Chuck, who have fallen in other divisions as well, because they're a little bit more. Rampage is in there. When Rampage knocked out Chuck, that was Chuck, right? That wasn't like when Rich Franklin knocked out Chuck and he was sort of going away. I think Rashad Evans deserves some credit just for what he did in the division. He got the belt, but only held it for a little bit. So, stanky leg and all, I think that he is someone that you have to mention. You have to mention Randy Couture. I mean, this is, if we talk about the Cadillac division, of the UFC, it has to be this one. I mean, this one has the present, it has the past. I don't know how much it has of the future right now, but, because everything goes through lulls. But it's been lucky enough that it had one champion that could carry it for a long time. So, there's a lot of meat on the 205-pound bone. So here's where it gets interesting. We have to rank him, and we only got 5 spots. So, obviously, John Jones is 1, so you go.
Chuck Liddell. Number 2, Daniel Cormier. Number 3, Frank Shamrock. Number 4, Tito Ortiz. Number 5.
Hang on. Let's start over because you didn't put John Jones at number 1. So
You just said John Jones is already number 1.
Yeah, so then you.
John Jones, number 1. Number 2, Chuck Liddell.
Okay.
Number 3, don't remember what I said. Number 3, Frank Shamrock. Number 4, Tito Ortiz. Number 5, Daniel Cormier.
I don't hate it. And I like that you put Frank Shamrock over Tito Ortiz. Folks will remember that Frank Shamrock defeated Tito Ortiz.
The fight that he had against Tito Ortiz was insane. I know it was in, 1999? But, it's a crazy fight. Go back and watch that. If you think that old UFC, it's going to be boring, it's going to be terrible. It's not good fighting or it's not comparable to what we see today. That was a hell of a fight.
It was a hell of a fight. And let me tell you something. Tito Ortiz became who Tito Ortiz became because of that fight with Frank Shamrock. There's 1,000 interviews that back up that statement. The reason was at the end of the fight, the way the fight ended, you can maybe make an argument for strikes to the back of the head, but it was Frank on top and Tito was just completely gassed. And from that point forward, Tito made a commitment to never being tired in a fight again, and he became known for his cardio. For the rest of it, he started training at Big Bear. Everything changed. So, and then after Frank Shamrock, he vacated the title, and then Tito won it against Vanderlei Silva, which this is Vanderlei Silva's first run in the UFC. So it was Vanderlei Silva, Yuki Kondo, Evan Tanner, Elvis Sinasek, Vladimir Matyushenko, Ken Shamrock. Now listen, that is not murderer's row of 205-pound fighters. But the way that Tito fought, Tito was the guy who originated striking from the opponent's guard. So he had a lot of big fights. And he made a lot of money for the UFC. If you ask someone who's Tito Ortiz's biggest rival of all time, and they say Chuck Liddell, I could just easily see you say Ken Shamrock. So if you've had 2 rivals that were that big in your career, how much money and how many eyes did you draw to your career? A lot. So I would say that Tito Ortiz is one of the more relevant figures in the history of MMA, but I don't know that he was a better 205-pound fighter than Frank Shamrock.
What are your 5?
My 5 would be John Jones, Chuck Liddell, Frank Shamrock, Tito Ortiz, and Daniel Cormier. Same as you pretty much.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so I think we're pretty lined up at 205. Craig, this is the oddest division of all. As a lot of high-profile fighters have held the belt that presumably makes you the baddest man on the planet, but not many can hold it. Each having their own Achilles heel, as it seems. Stipe Miocic stands alone with the requisite 3 title defenses for mention. But let's talk about the rest of the division and who mattered in it. Is it a slam dunk that Stipe Miocic is the GOAT?
You could make the argument if you wanted, and you could say Fedor Emelianenko is the GOAT just because the run that he went on in Pride and then Affliction didn't go great and everything else didn't go great. But in Pride, Fedor was the best at that time. And then Stipe Miocic hit the scene, and he's got the loss to Stefan Struve. But after that, absolute tear. The one loss to Daniel Cormier. But Stipe Miocic, for me, is the greatest of all time. Just because of, again, some of the strength of schedule, some of the guys that he's beaten, the Verdums, the Junior Dos Santos, the Daniel Cormier, I've got him as my GOAT. Because, again, it's the iron sharpens iron type of thing. And that's not to say the wins that Fedor had in Pride didn't matter, but some of them weren't as good as some of the wins that Stipe's had.
All right. For me, I feel like the only person...
Don't say Brendan Schaub.
That's going to get – I won't. Friend of the show, Brendan Schaub, I won't say him. So you're going to hate this, but I have to
Is it Tim Sylvia?
It's not.
Is it Randy Couture?
I think it might be Brock Lesnar. I think Brock Lesnar might be the closest guy to the GOAT in the history of the heavyweight division in terms of really coming to the fruition of his abilities in a very short period of time. He was sidelined. Listen, we can make cases about sideline. We can talk Cain Velasquez, and we'll get into all that in honorable mention. The diverticulitis. I'm going to give it to Stipe, although I don't know that if Stipe on his best day and Brock on his best day fought, if Stipe would get the win. So I'm going to give it to Stipe just because of, the resume. But I mean, listen, dude. This guy beat Alistair Overeem, Junior Dos Santos, Francis Ngannou, and Daniel Cormier. It doesn't get much better than that. So I'm going to give it to Miocic on strength of schedule and on just skill set. All right, so let's talk about the People's Champ. What do you got?
Okay, that's where I put Fedor. Fedor's got to be number one. Pride, never die. Then Cain Velasquez. Listen, people still consider him the People's Champ. Even when he came back and didn't win, he's still the People's Champ. Then you've got Randy Couture, just the run that he went on. That's kind of a combination of light heavyweight and heavyweight, so it's not really fair. But Randy Couture up there. And then Mirko Cro Cop, Pride, Rise, and UFC. Brendan Schaub did knock him out, and I saw that highlight today on Twitter, which is weird, but I've got Cro Cop in there too because a lot of people consider him to be the People's Champ. But if it was my pick and I'd get Stipe as the GOAT, then I'd get Fedor as People's Champ.
I think it depends on how far you go back. The old thing of if you ask your grandfather one, you'll get one answer. If you ask your father, you'll get a different answer. If you ask yourself, there'll be a different answer. So here's a couple of names we could go for People's Champ. Bas Rutten is an immensely popular fighter. He was a long ago heavyweight champion. You could talk about Andrei Arlovsky, who was a hugely popular fighter when he was champion. You mentioned Randy Couture. JDS was very popular. I think that if you put him against Cain would be the more popular of the two. And you can make a case for Daniel Cormier. So I think there's a lot of guys that you could kind of say are the People's Champion. I don't hate what you said. Fedor did not ever hold the belt in UFC. We are mostly talking about UFC, although we've kind of alluded to other divisions. The UFC is the division. So I don't disagree with Fedor. Fedor may have a better spot in uncrowned champ, but I would be happy with any of those answers in terms of People's Champ. And I don't want to nail it down to one because if we nail it down to one, here's the problem with that. We don't mention that there's a lot of guys in this division in the history of it. All right, what about uncrowned champ?
Okay, you could go a lot of different ways here. And if we're counting winning things, this guy won the Ultimate Fighter, so that counts. I've got Roy Nelson as my uncrowned champ. Yeah, he never fought for a belt in the UFC, but guess who he beat to win the Ultimate Fighter? Brendan Schaub. So good for Roy Nelson. UFC Ultimate Fighter winner. That's who I have there.
Don't hate it. I would say. All right, so for the purposes of this discussion, let's throw interim belts out the window. So then it gets interesting for me because your uncrowned champ would be Shane Carwin. Your uncrowned champ could be who's the other guy I was just thinking about? Alistair Overeem. Uncrowned champ could be, I don't want to go Bigfoot Silva, that's too much. But I don't know that Frank Mir was an outright champion. Big Nog. So your uncrowned champions could be Big Nog, they could be Shane Carwin, or they could be who's the other one I said? Alistair Overeem. Those three to me fall in the uncrowned champion position.
All way better than mine, and if I had to pick out of all of them, and I'm gonna put myself like dead to rights, I picked this, I would like Shane Carwin is a name that I would definitely go with there.
And here's where honorable mention gets interesting because there's a lot of guys. The thing that they say about heavyweights is that if you keep them in there long enough, something's bound to happen, right? And it often does. And I think that's why we get these guys with these short title reigns because some guy figures it out for a while, but then he's getting in there with a big boy that can throw hands too. And especially if you come in there with a certain game plan, you have a guy like Tim Sylvia who held the belt much longer than anybody would have wanted him to. 229 days the first time, 322 days the second time. But for honorable mention, we got to talk about a guy like Shane Carwin. We have to talk about Kevin Randleman. We have to talk about, we haven't even brought Mark Coleman up yet. We haven't brought Maurice Smith up yet. Randy Couture was the heavyweight champion twice. Once back in the day in 97, and then he beats Tim Sylvia in 2007. So, to me, I'm going to go with Randy Couture. If we're not making him People's Champ, I'm going to go with him for the honorable mention just because I think he's the guy that you may forget about, but you can't tell the story of the heavyweight division without Randy Couture for a number of reasons. Beat Tim Sylvia when he was wildly, outmatched in terms of size. One of the best, let me tell you something. You watch that Randy Couture Tim Sylvia fight. I don't talk about this often, but it's one of my favorite fights of all time. The reason why is because of Randy Couture's head movement, which you never see in MMA. But so he fought Brock Lesnar. He fought back in the day. He's fought everybody. So for me, I'll take Randy Couture as the honorable mention. So now here comes the fun part. We got to rank them.
If I'm ranking heavyweights, number 1, Stipe, number 2, Fedor, number 3. It's weird because this is the way that it's written down, but this is the way that I'd actually do it. So Stipe, Fedor, Cain Velasquez, Junior Dos Santos, 5, Randy Couture.
All right, I'm going to go Stipe. I am not going to put Fedor in this because he never fought UFC.
You fella.
I'm going Stipe, Brock, Cain, DC, Dos Santos.
You can't go wrong. I don't think you can. I know you don't like my Fedor pick it too, but
before we finish up with this ranking, we'd be remiss if we did not mention Fabricio Verdum, who beat Fedor Emelianenko in Strikeforce, came over, won the belt, won the interim over Mark Hunt, and it did lose to Stipe. He really didn't have any defenses, but I mean, he was one of those guys. For a minute, they were talking about him as best heavyweight of all time. Now he didn't back it up in the UFC, but he had a little bit of a run. So, and honestly, part of me feels like Andrei Arlovsky should sneak into that top 5.
We mentioned a couple of names here, and I want to go back to cards you should watch. And I mentioned this, I think, last week, and we laughed about it. And then I went back and watched the card. UFC 54. Diego Sanchez is on that card. GSP fights Frank Trigg. Randy Couture is on at a heavyweight. Chuck Liddell's in the main event against Jeremy Horn. I'm pretty sure Tim Sylvia wins by head kick knockout. Like, it's a wild card that you should definitely go back and watch because all these parts and pieces and big names, they just don't fight each other.
Yeah. All right, let's move on to the women. We're going to start at women's strawweight. Craig, conventional wisdom will tell you that the women's strawweight division has one queen, and that queen is Joanna Jędrzejczyk. However, that queen just fought and was defeated by its current champion, Zhang Weili. Let's talk 115 pounds for the women and who left their mark. Listen, let's not get into recency bias. The GOAT has to be Joanna, correct?
Yeah, it has to be. I mean, let's go through your champs. Carla Esparza, Joanna Jędrzejczyk, Rose Namajunas, Jessica Andrade, Zhang Weili. There's your champs. It was pretty quick. And who held the belt for longest and who had the most defenses? Joanna Jędrzejczyk. And who still considers herself the boogie woman and the champ? Joanna Jędrzejczyk. So for me, not due to that last fact, she's still considered the GOAT at 115.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I mean, that's hard to argue. I think that she's the one that has really established. I mean, she was the one who was not the first champ, but probably would have been had she been included in the Ultimate Fighter. She got that belt off the Cookie Monster as quickly as she could. Carla Esparza won it. And that fight to me, I always kind of liked Carla Esparza. I thought she was kind of like fun and cute. She seemed like a cool chick. I was like, okay, this seems like a girl you wouldn't mind having the champion for a while. And then when Joanna Jędrzejczyk just came in there and just took her apart, and all the things that Esparza did well, couldn't even get started. So for me, it's a no-brainer that Jędrzejczyk's the champ. Who's the people's champ?
It's Jessica Penne for taking that beating against Joanna Jędrzejczyk. Jessica Penne, people's champ. No, for me, I've got Zhang Weili. I mean, she beat Andrade, absolutely decimated her, had one of the best fights I've ever seen against Joanna Jędrzejczyk. And you can say, Craig, that's recency bias. It wasn't that good of a fight. It was a pretty darn good fight. And I consider it among the greatest of all time. She's your champ right now. Very likable. One of the bigger stars right now in the UFC due to the fact that she's from China, but not limited to that fact. She's my people's champ.
I think someday she will be. I think she's of anyone I've seen in a really long time. There are some Brazilian fighters in the past who did this. No real names pop to mind, but I know for a fact that sort of embraced the learning English, trying to market themselves better.
Anderson Silva.
Yeah, Anderson Silva. He kind of did. He always was kind of a little bit funky with the Verdum did it. So for me, I think the people's champ right now comes down to Namajunas or Esparza. I think Esparza is the more likable person. I think that Namajunas got a lot of popularity because, she's got some connection to Trevor Whitman. She's got some connection Justin Gaethje. People like Pat Barry. She beat Joanna Jędrzejczyk. So, like, for me, she beat her twice. And, for me, I think that's the one who I would say would be the people's champ. I'm going to go with Rose Namajunas on that one. All right, what about uncrowned champ?
Write that sentence in stone. People like Pat Barry. Uncrowned champ. This is weird because, again, I listed off all the champs that we've had at 115, but there's somebody right now that a lot of people consider if she fought for the belt, she'd win, she'd reign, whatever. Tatiana Suarez, for me, is your uncrowned champ. And it's just that lingering neck injury that's such an issue. I don't know if it's ever going to happen, but if she were to fight for the title, I bet you she'd be favored to win that fight against Zhang Weili or whoever's the champ.
For me, the uncrowned champ is Claudia Gadelha. I think that she was very close to Joanna Jędrzejczyk when Joanna Jędrzejczyk was at her best. So her best was just not bet. It's kind of like a Frankie Edgar, Benson Henderson situation. When Benson was at his best, Frankie couldn't get with him. Same thing with Claudia. I think that if anybody else was champion at that time, Claudia would have beat them. If Carlos Esparza was the champion, I think if Rose Namajunas was the champion, I think Claudia would have beat her. So that's the uncrowned champ for me.
I bet there would have been a point too, and it wouldn't be in 2020 or 2019 or probably 2018, but Karolina Kowalkiewicz, at one point, you probably could have put her there.
I agree. So then let's get to honorable mention. Who do you have for honorable mention?
That's where I have Carlos Esparza. I mean, first champ, always a champ, and she has very competitive fights even now against some of the top women in this division. So she's my honorable mention.
I'm going to go with you on honorable mention. I do think that Namajunas was a little bit more impressive as a champion, but Carla beat her to win the belt initially. So you could have made the case that Rose was not yet ready. Listen, I'm with you. I think that the first champ definitely deserves honorable mention. We did not do that with all the other divisions, but it's a rule we just made up. So there you go. All right, let's rank them. If we have Joanna first, go ahead and hit me with the top five.
Jędrzejczyk first, number 2, Zhang Weili, number 3, Rose Namajunas, number 4, Jessica Andrade, number 5, Carlos Esparza. Those are all your champs.
I will put Rose. I'll do the exact same thing that you did, but I'll put Rose over Zhang Weili until she gets some more title defenses. So I agree with you, and I might flip-flop the bottom too. So hold on. You had Rose. I'm sorry, you had Joanna. So I'll go Joanna, Rose, Zhang Weili. I'll put Carla over Jessica.
Sure.
All right. So let's move on to 125 pounds. Craig, 125 pounds for the ladies, has a bullet with its name on it. She has dominated the division and looks to continue. Who else has mattered at women's flyweight?
Henry Cejudo.
All right.
Let's rank them 1 through 5. Valentina, Shevchenko,
this guy just
Valentina,
skipping all the
Shevchenko,
people's
Valentina,
champs, the uncrowned
Shevchenko.
champs.
It's all Valentina Shevchenko.
All right, I can respect that.
But no, realistically, your GOAT is Shevchenko. She was so competitive. Popular is a bit of a stretch, but really competitive. Fought great opponents at 135. Close fight against Nunes. Maybe not as close a fight against Nunes. If they fought again, who knows? Flip a coin. But for me, your GOAT right now, it has to be Valentina Shevchenko without a doubt.
People's champ.
This is where I have Roxanne Modafferi, not a current champ. You could actually, and I would not get mad at you, you could put Nico Montano here if you wanted. She was the first champ, and she beat Roxanne Modafferi to win that season of The Ultimate Fighter. So you know what? I'm going to put Nico Montano, but in terms of people's champ, I'm the only people. I'm the one people.
We did this a couple times, so we'll do it for here. I think Valentina's the GOAT. Valentina's people's champ. Uncrowned champ.
That's where so if I have Nico Montano as the person champ, then for uncrowned champ, I guess I'll put Roxanne Modafferi because she fought in that finale of The Ultimate Fighter. She might get a title shot coming up soon. She beat Macy Barber. I'll put her there.
I think that you are going to absolutely despise my choice here.
Jessica I.
No. I need to make sure because I'm not 100% sure. And this what I'm looking up right here isn't helping me either. But let me ask the question that needs to be asked. What division? Man, I should know this.
Just bring up the name. Maybe I'll be able to tell you.
No, No, I know who it is. I don't know if I want to go with it or not. I'll go with, so for uncrowned champ, you went with what? Macy Barber?
No, I actually went with Roxanne Modafferi.
I can go with Macy. Obviously, she just lost to Roxanne Modafferi, but you know, yeah, we'll go with Macy just because I think we need to cover her. She's relevant in the division. She may be a flash in the pan, but we'll see. All right, so let's go on to honorable mention.
This is where I went squirrely, but I bet you if Drake Riggs is listening, he'll be happy. I went with Tara LaRosa because total record 22-5. She fought Roxanne Modafferi 3 times. She won the first fight. She lost the next 2 by split and then unanimous decision. Fought Vanessa Porto, fought just a whole lot of names. Shayna Baszler, Julie Kedzie, just a lot of names that a lot of people would recognize at a time when women's MMA wasn't a huge thing. She was also on season 18 of The Ultimate Fighter, lost to Canadian and Sarah Morris. But for me, Tara LaRosa, when you're fighting on the fringes like that and you're not in the UFC, but you're picking up wins over quality opponents, I have to have you there as an honorable mention. You weren't a champ, but that doesn't matter. That's my honorable mention.
For honorable mention, I'm going to go ahead and go with
Liz Carmouche?
No, I'm going to go with Nico Montagna just because she was the
Alima
first.
McFarlane?
No, Nico Montagna. Just because she was the first one and she was the champ. Now, here's where it gets interesting for me. And I kind of hedged myself on this earlier, and I want to get your thoughts on this. For either honorable mention, you're going to hate this, but I'm going to do it anyway.
Oh, boy.
Juliana Pena is a bantamweight fighter who has fought Valentina Shevchenko and Nico Montagna. Lost to Shevchenko, beat Montagna. I just got to put her in there. She's not going to get ranked. She's not the uncrowned champ. Okay. I just think that if she can make 125, it would make 125 more interesting.
What was Nico Montagna, and I'm being a dink because I know the answer. What was Nico Montagna's record when she fought Juliana Pena?
I don't know, 8-2.
I think it was 4-3.
It was 4-3 after she fought Juliana Pena.
Oh, okay. So it's 4-2 then.
I'm with you. Listen, Nico Montagna is not by any means a bar to set for anything. I'm just saying.
Which you just did.
That's fair. All right, let's move on to where this women's divisions really get interesting. Craig, the debate at 135 pounds for the women seemed to end when Amanda Nunes knocked out Chris Cyborg, completing her annihilation of all relevant bantamweight women's fighters. However, she does not hold the record for most title defenses. That belongs to Ronda Rousey. Craig, what do you, or more importantly, who do you have as the GOAT at women's bantamweight?
People are going to call it recency bias, but it's Amanda Nunes. She beat Ronda Rousey. She's beaten every current and former champ at 135 pounds and 145 pounds. So she's got to be the GOAT at one of them. And if she's had 5 title defenses and she's one away from Ronda Rousey's record, then to me, she's a GOAT at 135.
Craig, if I mention Royce Gracie's name right now, how many mentions on this show will that make for Royce Gracie?
One.
One time we brought up Royce Gracie in this entire show. Okay? Meaning in no other division. Now, granted, he predated the sanctioning and all that, right? But we have not yet brought up Royce Gracie. The reason we've not yet brought up Royce Gracie is because Royce Gracie was ahead of the curve. So was Ronda Rousey. And I think that when women really started to figure out how to fight and the divisions got deeper and the sport evolved, Amanda Nunes came along and wiped Ronda Rousey out. So while I think that she definitely will get mentioned honorably at some point, she's not the GOAT. So I'm with you. Amanda Nunes is the GOAT. All right, People's Champ.
This is one where People's Champ, there were a lot of people that did not like Ronda Rousey. And when Holly Holm knocked her out, that made a lot of people happy. And Holly Holm was a one-time champ. She got decimated by Miesha Tate. She had many chances after that to try and win the belt at 135 and 145. Holly Holm's my People's Champ. Because everybody still thinks of her as a champ. She gets paid like a champ. She still fights in main events, co-main events, on pay-per-views and fight nights like a champ.
I'm going to go with Miesha Tate. I will say this. in the same way that we're having recency bias for Amanda Nunes, allegedly, I don't agree with that, but you did bring the term up. I think it's a little bit that way with Holly Holm and Miesha Tate as well. Ronda Rousey was immensely popular, but I do think that she was one of those people that people were fans of hers because she was successful. And once she lost, it was okay to then talk about how much of a shit she was. And I think that so some of her popularity kind of skidded once she lost. Same things happened with Conor McGregor. So when people are winning, it's easy to sort of jump on the bandwagon and be like, oh, Ronda's the coolest thing in the world. Then she loses. It's like, she's kind of a bitch. And it's like, that's
Entourage wasn't that good.
That's just how people are, right? And I think so. I'm going to go with Miesha as my people's champ with the full knowledge and couching it by saying that when her and Ronda were going head to head, most people were rooting for Ronda, not Miesha. Uncrowned champ, who do you got?
This one's weird. I put down an answer. I don't like the answer I went with. It's bad.
You're going to hate mine even more.
Yeah, I wish I could change it. But the answer that I wrote down, people can gasp in their houses or in their cars, but you probably shouldn't be in your car right now still. Aspen Ladd's who I put because she seemed at one point like the future at 135, but I don't think she beats Amanda Nunes. You could put Ketlin Vieira there, even though she lost badly to Irina Aldana. I don't know. Pick one of those three. I really don't know here. I don't.
I'm going with Alpha Cat Zingano. She beat.
That's a good one.
Amanda Nunes. She's beaten a lot of women, and she did not beat Ronda Rousey. She was not close to Ronda Rousey. Okay, but in her prime, okay, when she was on her run, it was Raquel Pennington, it was Miesha Tate, it was Amanda Nunes, and it got messy. She lost to Ronda Rousey. She lost to the uncrowned champion at 125 pounds, Juliana Pena. She lost to Ketlin. I mean, she's lost to a lot of girls, right? But she had that run, where she beat Miesha and she beat Amanda and she beat Pennington. So when you beat champions, to me, you're an uncrowned champion.
That's the right pick. Good pick.
All right, let's go to honorable mention.
I mean, if your GOAT's Nunes, your people's champs Holm, your uncrowned champ is Cat Zingano, and you can argue those three, your honorable mention, if those three hold true, has to be Ronda Rousey.
I agree. I mean, it's hard to argue with Ronda's resume unless the argument is that she was just ahead of the curve, and that's the argument. She had, it's one of those things where it's like it's okay if if you're a one-trick pony if it's a hell of a trick, and she had a hell of a trick, and that she had that arm bar. No one could get away from it. No one could run from it. She knew how to get you down. She knew how to find it. She had a million different ways to find it. And, it was just a matter of time before she did it. It was weird because here's the thing that you have to give Ronda Rousey. She turned what other fighters have traditionally used a huge strike for, right? When you fought Anderson Silva, now he had a variety of strikes. But let's use Mike Tyson or Deontay Wilder as a better example. When you walked in there with them, it was like just a matter of time before they landed the big shot. And that was the question, and if we're keeping them, let's do it better. Let's do it better. Francis Ngannou, Mike Tyson, Deontay Wilder, right? Chuck Liddell. It was a matter of time. And most guys could stay away from that shot. Ronda Rousey turned a submission into that. Now, did she do it at a time when a lot of people were not as versed in submissions and art? Yes. Okay, we'll admit that. But she still did it. And people were a lot more savvy about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu when she had her run than when Royce had his. And people seem to give her a lot more flack than they give Royce. So if we're going to say that Royce was great for being ahead of the curve, he was way more ahead of the curve than Ronda was.
So then if we rank them top five, I'm going to go, so your GOAT, Amanda Nunes, is 1. Number 2, honorable mention, Ronda Rousey. Number 3, Miesha Tate. Number 4, Holly Holm. Number 5, Cat Zingano.
You could do that. Yeah, I wouldn't have a problem with that. Who else? I mean, if we're looking down the list here, who else has been champion? I mean, that's it. It's been Ronda, Holly, Miesha, Nunes. I mean, no one else got close. I particularly listen.
Shevchenko.
Yeah, I particularly am impressed with the Holly Holm Miesha Tate thing gets funky because Miesha beat Holly, but Holly beat Ronda, and Ronda beat Miesha twice. So, and listen, I'm going to tell you guys something right now. You guys want free content? Here's free content. In the 80s, Hagler, Hearns, Leonard, and Duran, the 4 kings. You guys want to write a book? You want to do a documentary? Rousey, Holm, Tate, Nunes, the 4 queens. There's your free content. So that there should be a documentary about those girls. There should be books written about those 4 girls at bantamweight. And guess what, guys? They all fought each other. So if you're looking for that sort of, that Craig's writing it down now. Craig just is filing a copyright with the Canadian government. He's going to be the 4 queens. Craig and I are going to book coming summer of 2023. All right, Craig, or Clegg, whichever one you want to go by. Listen, let's talk about the hardest one to pin down. It's women's featherweight. Young in the game and mostly lame. This one has had a lot of sizzle and not much steak. What are your thoughts on 145 pounds for the women?
I mean, this one could get funky because you have to go outside of the confines of the UFC, and you've got big names. You got Julia Budd, Chris Cyborg, Amanda Nunes, Jermaine Durandamy's fought at 145. I'm probably missing some too, but my GOAT isn't Amanda Nunes, even though she beat Chris Cyborg. Chris Cyborg's still my GOAT just based on the absolute decimation of everyone except for Nunes, and then she goes over to Bellator and she beats Julia Budd, who was a champ for some time. She's the, what do we call her? The Grand Slam champion, 4 different organizations, Strikeforce, Invicta, UFC, Bellator. She's my GOAT at 145.
I agree. I mean, there would not be a women's division in the UFC if not for Chris Cyborg. She's the one that was created for. She's the one that it was stocked with and or stocked up for. I agree with you. I mean, obviously, Amanda Nunes beating her at 145 pounds or 135 pounds or 185 pounds doesn't change the fact that, like you said, she's been in many different organizations, held belts in all of them. She's definitely the 145-pound GOAT.
So then when you look at People's Champ, the cult hero that knocks out the big star is Amanda Nunes. She's my People's Champ for that reason.
Part of me wants to go with Jermaine Durandamy. She doesn't give you a lot, so I'm going to go with Amanda Nunes as well. She's double champ. She's has a fantastic personality. She's awesome. So, yeah, I'll agree with you on People's Champ for Amanda Nunes.
Uncrowned champ kind of gets hairy. I wrote something down, but I'm not going to go with what I wrote down. I'm going to go with the 2 that are challenging for the belt right now in the UFC, or possibly could be, in Megan Anderson and Felicia Spencer. Those would be your 2 uncrowned champs. I don't think they stand a snowball's chance in hell at winning, but the UFC wants to keep them around so they don't go anywhere else. What do you think here?
I agree with Megan Anderson. If we talk about the best fighter that never won a belt in the UFC, to me, Megan Anderson is kind of like Uriah Faber. Fantastic in another promotion. Just showed up at the wrong time, has the wrong date on her birth certificate to be a champion in the UFC. So I'm with you on that. Obviously, there's some other ladies out there that may cut some weight, maybe make their way over to the UFC, but that's a huge leap. For people that are 145-pound fighters, I'm with you with Megan Anderson.
And then for honorable mention, again, longtime Bellator champ, Canadian, Julia Budd, and then your inaugural UFC featherweight champ, Jermaine Durandamy. Those are my honorable mentions.
We'll go with Jermaine Durandamy just because she had the belt, and she's yeah, we'll go with her. Listen, describing Jermaine Durandamy is a pretty boring endeavor, so I'm not going to get too far into it. But she inaugurated the division. She certainly deserves some props for that.
Utrecht, Netherlands' finest.
All right, let's rank them.
Number 1, Chris Cyborg. Number 2, Amanda Nunes. Number 3, Jermaine Durandamy. Number 4, Holly Holm. Number 5, Felicia Spencer.
All right, I'll go with that. That works for me. All right, listen, guys, let's get on to start the conversation. This is where we give shouts to MMA Reddit. This is an interesting one this week. I will even assist you in this. We'll run down all of our GOATs. We've talked about the past. We're living in the present. Now let's talk about the future. 5 years from now, we're going to start the conversation and end the show with who's next. Take a look at the divisions and tell me who you think might lose their GOAT status after enough time has passed. I'm going to give it a 5-year window because, if we wait long enough, my son could be the next GOAT at bantamweight. But, let's talk about in terms of 5 years from now. So we'll start. Is it easier for you if I just run down the divisions, you give me a yay or nay? Let's do that. That's fun.
Let's do it that way.
Flyweight division, Demetrius Johnson.
Nay.
I think he keeps it as well. Bantamweight, Dominic Cruz.
Yay.
Who's going to take it?
Sean O'Malley.
I like that. 5 years. Featherweight, Jose Aldo.
Nay.
Lightweight, we went with I went with Benson, you went with BJ. Either or?
What is it? Yay?
Yeah.
Yeah, Habib's gonna be your guy.
There you go. Welterweight, GSP.
Now I'm confused. Nay?
Nay. So, yay, someone will take it. Nay, they won't.
Okay, good. I got it.
You're doing good so far. Anderson Silva.
Nay.
205 pounds, John Jones.
Nay.
Heavyweight, Stipe Miocic.
Yay. And this is where, again, I'm a hipster. Cyril Gane. Or Francis Ngannou.
All right, I like those. Women's strawweight, Ioanni Jacek.
Yay, Zhang Weili.
Look at you. Okay, I'll go with you. I'll go with you for this reason. I'm going to give this one caveat. Anybody that's capable of having that fight with Ioanni Jacek is capable of a long title reign. So I'll go with you. Yay.
Unless you take too much punishment and then you're scared to pull the trigger.
Or unless Tatiana Suarez gets right and takes you down all night.
That much is true.
Women's flyweight, the Bullet, Valentina Shevchenko.
Valentina Shevchenko is going to be the champion for another 25 or 30 years, so nay.
Amanda Nunes.
Nay.
I think if Amanda Nunes retired tomorrow, her fight kit could go and just defend the belt without her even in it. Women's featherweight, Cyborg.
That's a tough one. But even if Amanda Nunes beats like Felicia Spencer and Megan Anderson, I don't think those wins are as meaningful as Chris Cyborg's wins, so I'm going to say nay.
Here's my one question. We didn't bring this person up earlier. If Kayla Harrison decided to get dedicated to get down to 145 pounds and went to the UFC, do you think she's capable of that type of a run to unseat Cyborg? Because Cyborg did this over 10 years, right? She fought Gina Carano.
That was a big fight back then, was it not?
No, but I'm talking about in terms of time. Like, it took her a minute to build that resume. There are people that you're talking about, like Khabib is already – he's 5 years away from the resume he would need to be the lightweight guy.
I don't know
I mean, like, in the next 5 years.
Pretty close. Yeah.
You follow me? She would need more time to use
I agree with you. Yeah.
Okay.
I know you mean.
And that's it. Is there anybody in the history of GOATs that we neglected to mention? Is there anybody that you feel deserves to be in this conversation that was not in this conversation?
Yeah, there's a guy I'm thinking about at 170 pounds that had 2 fights in the UFC. He was 0-0 when he came in and made his debut. I believe he debuted in 2017 or 18. In his first fight, he fought Mickey Gall. In his second fight, he fought Mike Jackson, the photographer from LFA. I'm talking about Chick Magnet Punk with an overall professional record of 0-2, honorary GOAT at 170 pounds. Is there anybody else we missed?
I don't think so. I think between guys who have fought and guys who, haven't, we did not talk about some of the tournament winners. We didn't really talk about Ken Shamrock. We didn't really talk about Don Fry. We didn't talk about Marco Huas. Some of those guys, but I don't think they deserve to be in the GOAT status. I think once the divisions came in and you had to win belts and defend them, we didn't talk about Dan Severn really. So, I think we touched those guys sort of. We probably could have talked more about Severn in heavyweight. Probably could have talked more about. I think if I was going to, in my mind, put Don Fry in a division, I probably would have put him in either 85 or 205. If I was going to put, Marco Huas, he probably would have been 170. So there's guys. Mark Coleman was a heavyweight. So there's guys for sure. But you still got me?
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, there's guys for sure, but I think that I think we covered all the relevant fighters. All right, so Craig, the time has come. We're going to talk about all the other content on Loudmouth MMA Podcast Network, including Not Safe for Work podcast with Kyle Steele and Fred Kirby. Between the Links, hosted by TBD, starring an all-star cast of writers, also TBD. The Loudmouth MMA Recap Show, starring yours truly and Keith Schillen. The Breakdown Show with Max and Marcel. MMA Yesterday with Kyle Steele and Keith Schillen. The soon-to-be-renamed Off the Cuff. What else is there? MMA Takeover with Keith Schillen. The Kyle Steele Show. There's a lot on the Loudmouth MMA Podcast Network. One thing that will not be on the Loudmouth MMA Podcast Network is another GOAT of the Loudmouth MMA Podcast Network, Craig Allen. Craig, this will be your final show for the Loudmouth MMA Podcast Network as a, regular. It's not that you're never going to appear again. So, guys, obviously, spoiler alert, Early Stoppage will no longer be on Loudmouth MMA Podcast. But it will be around, so you'll have to find it, and we'll make sure that you do. Craig, talk about your time at the Loudmouth MMA Podcast Network and talk about just what all went into the decision. If you feel comfortable doing that, just however you want to talk about your time at Loudmouth and what's next.
Yeah, I feel like I put out a message on Facebook and on Between the Links on Monday night. Like, I didn't really address it because I didn't know what to say. And then Mike Heck kind of signed off, said this is my last show in Loudmouth. And then it was my chance to talk again. I didn't want to steal the moment, so I just kind of stayed quiet. And then after the show, Keith said, hey, you probably should have said something there. I just kind of prisoner of the moment. So I made a post on Facebook and wanted to thank everybody. It has nothing to do with MMA. Outside of MMA, I have another job prospect coming up. I'm not going to have enough time to fully commit to doing a lot of shows during the week. I've already moved my own Fight Night Pick stuff over to weekends, so it just kind of goes part and parcel with that. In terms of coming on, the first opportunity I had to do anything even closely related to Loudmouth, I should know the name, but what was the name of Between the Links before Between the Links?
Oh, I don't remember.
Around the Cage.
Yeah.
Around the Cage with Davidson Baker. I was on that show, and then I came on to Loudmouth, and the first show, it was me, Davidson, Brandon Sibsey, Elvis Sinisic, and I think that was it. And I lost in the finals to Elvis Sinisic, and I'm still mad about it because I had a better answer than he did. It's just he fought for a UFC title at one point, I didn't. And Davidson Baker was the judge, who has nice hair, by the way. But all that said, had a lot of fun in Between the Links, made a lot of awesome connections. Off the Cuff was a lot of fun. Early Stoppage has been a ton of fun. We go pretty deep into some of these write-ups, believe it or not. I mean, this show's been quite a long show compared to some of the other ones, but it's so much fun. It's something that I look forward to every week. So I'm not just trying to toot your horn, but in terms of Loudmouth, they've got great things coming down the pipe. I know they've already added somebody to the network, and I'm sure they're going to have more editions coming up shortly. And just stay tuned for some of these shows because they're some of the best out there. So stay tuned for sure.
And guys, just to be clear about the future of Loudmouth and how it's going, the reason why, so I'm going to be still staying with Loudmouth because I like doing a recap. I like doing all angles. There are shows that I'm interested in. There might be something else I'm interested in doing moving forward. The reason why Early Stoppage is leaving is because I'm only going to do Early Stoppage with Craig, and Craig's leaving. So that's how it goes. And that's just the way it is. You know, if he's no longer a part of Loudmouth, then the show's no longer a part of Loudmouth because it's our show. It's not my show. It's our show. So it will continue because we enjoy doing it too much for it not to continue. But with that being said, of course, I'm going to have something that's going to replace it on Loudmouth. That's just how I am. So if this is going away, then something else will replace it. So look for something else with some new person or some other guy that I have not yet done something with on Loudmouth. But yeah, it's if Craig is not a part of Loudmouth, then the show's not a part of Loudmouth. That's the way it is. I'm not trying to lay that at Craig's feet. I'm just saying that's how interested I am in doing the show with him. That's the way.
What am I supposed to say? It's gonna suck. It's gonna be terrible. Whatever replaced it, it's gonna suck. Don't listen to it.
That's the way. That's the way it goes. But yeah, I will tell you this: the new home of Early Stoppage will be probably where if you follow Craig, you'll know where it is. So we'll leave it at that.
That's fair.
All right, Craig. I can be followed at SM Cornerman. Craig can be followed at Craig Allen FMP. We'll see you next week. Craig, for the last time on Loudmouth MMA Podcast Network, say something witty.
You're going to think I'm a hippie, but sometimes the light's all shining on me. Other times I can barely see. Lately it occurs to me, what a long, strange trip it's been.
Couldn't have said it better myself. All right, guys. See you later. Peace.
Too far.